Okay, well, hello everybody. I'm happy to be popping on in here doing another live stream before the end of the month. And I am live streaming cross-platform today because we are continuing to promote my course, 5 Days to Ignite Your Love Light, which it digs a little bit more deeply into the McWilliam method with respect to cognitive reframing. So we've been doing a little bit of that all along the way this month with how to reframe your thoughts and your fears around getting your desires met, getting your needs met. And it's a process of digging into your mindset and changing the fundamental fears that tend to fuel what you think are your wants. But then we articulate our desires in a way that actually cuts off the flow of energy, the flow of information, the flow of possibility. And that ends up sort of bottlenecking our possibilities. So 5 Days to Ignite Your Love Light is just a course in which I help you work through that. So today I wanted to pop in and just do some live Q&A. I'm kind of doing this a little bit off the cuff. I love your videos. Thank you so much. As you're joining me here today, if you want to type your name and where you're coming from in the chat box there, I can give you a little shout out, and also lets me know that you can see and hear me okay. So one of the things that I wanted to start with here today was some questions that had popped up in my platform on various locations. I have everything kind of siphoned into one dashboard, so I thought I might go through a couple of them just sort of unplanned today. So the first question is, are my fears real or just a figment of my imagination? So when we have grown up in a circumstance, childhood situation with parents, friends, family members, teachers, a school environment in which we are repeatedly dismissed or invalidated or disqualified, or our feelings and our experiences are sort of systematically unacknowledged, right? We are also systematically separated from an essential trust in ourselves and in our own perceptions, because everything in our body and in our intuition may be telling us that something is one way, and then the rest of the world outside of us tells us, no, it's not that way, or no, it's bad for you to perceive it that way. And so we start to disconnect from whatever our essential self might be, from trusting our own instincts, right? We start to rely upon the validation of everybody and everything outside of us. And this happens when we're kids because everyone and everything outside of us is sort of considered to be the authority, right? We're very trusting of those that we are in their care. And if we talk about attachment, we're very reliant upon those that care for us because we need them to survive, right? So when this happens, we start to experience what's called a state of derealization or depersonalization. This is almost as if you're not in charge of your life. It feels like you're walking through a dream world. And it also creates a deep sense of confusion about our reality, a kind of listlessness, a lack of a sense of purpose, not knowing what's going to make us happy or what's going to bring us a sense of meaning. And when that happens, we tend to focus very narrowly on romantic partnership as the source of all of those things, because when we experience this kind of wounding, it occurs usually in and around a time, developmentally speaking, when our root and our sacral chakras are evolving. And that means that we experience a sense of fundamental comfort, safety, and trust and integrity residing within our own bodies. And the body is the first organizer of experience, right? The body is what takes in all of our sensate experiences. It's what filters and interprets all of the information from our surroundings. And then that gets translated into electrical impulses in our brain and in our higher neocortex, and then that's how we start to assign meaning to it, right, based on what we've been told. But when, as I said before, the root and the sacral chakra, those are the parts of us that help us reside more comfortably in our body, energetically speaking. If we have been disconnected from ourselves through repeated dismissals and all of these different facets of social conditioning, then none of it feels real. We have a difficulty to connect with it, and that's early attachment stuff. Timeline wise, it occurs right alongside all of the early developmental attachment stuff, right? So romantic relationship becomes a big focus for that as we evolve into adulthood, because it's an unresolved thing, right? So our definition of what is a romantic relationship becomes very narrowly focused, highly eroticized, and it becomes kind of limited, right? So when that happens, right, when we have this deep confusion about our reality, when we start to worry, are my fears real or just a figment of my imagination? Why is it that I can't seem to trust my own instincts about this, right? When we have this deep confusion about our reality and there is an overemphasis on external constructs to measure the truth of things, then it's very hard to receive anything. It's very hard to let anything in. And so we chase down unavailable partners, or we start to we get into situations where it's very difficult for us to receive the kind of love that we want, and we start qualifying those situations as too boring or too nice or understimulating, right? But it's because we don't know how, we've been surrounded by this layer of this fog, like this blanket of numbness. Okay, this is what I want to emphasize, is that anything that you experience is real, even that numbness, right? And if that's a numbness that you experience, that's really good information. So your fears are real for you if they are ruling your thoughts, attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. If you decide not to entertain those fears anymore, then you do start to depreciate its role in your life. But I also want to emphasize that fear itself is not always a bad thing, right? The problem comes in when we give it too much credence. This is actually true of any emotion or feeling that you might have. Feelings and emotions are really good information. It is not to be ignored, but it is not to be placed in charge. Okay. So I wouldn't recommend rejecting your fear or trying to disqualify it as unreal. Instead, I might have you be in dialogue with it, embrace it, allow yourself to have a conversation with your fear, to look at it more closely, to ask it where it comes from, to ask what exists at the root of it, right? Enough so that it feels, so that fear, you might even think of this fear as like a self part, right? That it has its own consciousness and constellation of energy within you. And look at it enough so that it starts to feel heard, but not so much, again, that you're placing it in charge. So kind of like a child, your fear wants to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. It wants to be cared about. It wants to be cared for, but it does not want to be in charge. Okay, that's not its job. By embracing that fear, though, by being in dialogue with it, by allowing it to move through you, then you start to learn to understand yourself better. And once you start to learn to understand yourself better, now it's like that fog lifts a little bit, or that, those gates open, and now you're starting to be able to receive something because you can start to feel it, right? You start to feel seen. So I hope that helps answer that question. There was another question here. Let me just want to acknowledge the chat box here. We have Jack from Newcastle, welcome. We have Dana from Oklahoma, welcome. We have greetings from Pennsylvania, Rick. We have Crystal, good afternoon, from St. Louis, Missouri. Oh, I'm glad you like the videos. Susan in Lafayette, Colorado, near Boulder. Hi there. Veronica from Dallas, welcome. Fatime from Toronto, hello. Emma from Spain. I'm glad you like the material. Okay. This is live. Yes, this is live. Hello, Jessica from Los Angeles. We have Gavina from UK. We've got a couple questions popping up. How does one discern healthy love when they are insecurely attached, when there is a tug of war between romanticism and secure partnership? Hello from Finland. Okay. So I do have a couple videos about that stuff. All right, I'm going to go through and see the questions popping up here. Is it possible that after a failed relationship and stressful situation, I moved from what is spice of life to a rolling stone entirely? Yes. So the thing I want to emphasize here is I think attachment styles are dynamic states of being. There's two videos on my YouTube channel, and I see you're joining me from YouTube, that I would recommend watching. One of them is called Attachment Styles as Dimensional States of Being. And the most recent one is trigger mapping and widening the window of tolerance. In the second video, I talk more about how these attachment styles are really just evidence of sympathetic nervous system stimulation, so fight or flight responses. So when you have your sympathetic nervous system is activated, that means that you perceive an attachment threat in your environment, and so your body goes into its natural instinctual survival mode. And when you have a sympathetic nervous system activation, this is primarily drawn from polyvagal theory with Stephen Porges, you will slip into fight or flight mode. So fight mode is usually related to the activating strategies of an anxiously attached individual. So they fight for the relationship and they do what they can to reestablish contact in whatever way they can. Unfortunately, the ways that they have learned, while they might have been adaptive in a dysfunctional environment in which they grew up, they tend to be maladaptive in a future and or present circumstance where they're getting the opposite of it's not serving them anymore, right? But that's how we learned how to be. And because that's how we learned how to be, that's how we start to filter the information in our environment. And that's how we think other people think the way we do. We think other people experience life the way we do. So we respond to them in the ways that we would, right? So when we have this sympathetic nervous system activation, you either have people who are fighting for the relationship, like anxious open hearts, or you have people who fly away in order to come back, right? They fly away until it is safe to come back, if it is ever to come back. And this looks like the withdrawal of rolling stones, avoidant rolling stones. So now if you have, let's say the threat becomes so great that flying away or fighting for the relationship, none of these things are working. Now you slip into a sense of helplessness and we drop into what's called dorsal vagal shutdown, which is an even deeper, earlier layer of the nervous system where you freeze, right? It's the freeze response. And this looks like dissociating. This looks like numbing out. This looks like what we just talked about, depersonalization, derealization, feeling like no matter what you do, there's going to be a negative outcome. And that's usually evolves from experiencing your relationships as both seeking it as a source of comfort, but also experiencing it as the source of threat. So there's nothing you can do, right? Now, in those instances, behaviors that we qualify as anxious behaviors or avoidant behaviors or spice of life behaviors, these are just patterns of coping that we use to mitigate the anxiety that creates in the moment, right? So you're going to pick what coping skills work the best for you. Now, this also has to do with your the flexibility of your self-concept. There's lots of factors that go into what coping skills you choose and why. There's your temperament, right? There's the inherent quality that you were born with. Epigenetics explains a lot about this. I have a video on my channel too that talks about epigenetics and boundary confusion. And also, your conditioning. So when you grow up in environments, systems don't like change. So if you grow up in environments that were sort of consistent, and most of our environments are consistent because they don't like change. So if you grew up in a consistently dysfunctional environment and it was consistently dysfunctional in the same way over and over again, that means that your way of coping with that carved a pretty deep groove in your brain. So you may be someone who more frequently hangs out in let's say anxious activating strategies because you grew up in environments that consistently required you to use those activating strategies to get by. Same thing goes in the other way. If you grew up in an environment that consistently fostered or encouraged deactivating strategies and it was an unchanging environment, then you have a deep groove that encourages you to use deactivating strategies to cope with sympathetic nervous system activation, right? If you grew up in changing environments where there was a lot of unpredictability, where sometimes it was safe, sometimes it wasn't, where there was a sense of comfort and then also a sense of threat, if nothing you did affected the way you were able to elicit attachment security from your environment one way or the other, then you are more likely to have experienced dorsal vagal shutdown. And that means you may be more of a spice of lifer. You might have a more disorganized attachment style, which means it's a bit chaotic. But this is the thing I would add. You also have a strength in that typically individuals who have spice of life attachment are very emotionally perceptive. even if they struggle to perceive their own emotions, even if they struggle to organize and regulate their own emotions, they're actually, maybe ironically or paradoxically, hugely adept at being able to monitor other people's emotions, right? They're very sensitive to that. Sometimes, often hypersensitive to that. And so they are often correct in noticing when something's off, but they may jump to a negative conclusion that may not be correct, right? So there's a lot of accuracy in the way that they read their partners, but there may be some inaccuracies in the negative conclusions that they jump to, right? So I wanted to just offer that as a way of reframing the way you even think about attachment styles, because yes, if you're someone who you feel like, well, I had more access to my activating strategies, but then I had a breakup and now I feel like I'm withdrawing more. I mean, that's also just like a natural course of going through a breakup, even for people who have secure attachment. But if you notice that you have more severe tendencies, then it may be that that's where the inner work comes in, right? You start working with, you really need to be working with these things on the body level, like modalities that help you on the body level. Okay. How does one discern healthy love when they're insecurely attached, when there is a tug of war between romanticism and secure partnership? Okay, so there's a couple of things that I would recommend. The first is examining your beliefs, right? So usually a lot of people have limiting beliefs around love, especially when you have an insecure attachment. There are some pretty common ones for anxious open hearts, for example. So anxious open hearts tend to believe there's very few possibilities of love in the world for me out there. If I can't make this work with this person, I can't make it work with anyone. I better hang on to what I have. That this person's my soulmate and I have to make it work, that I have to earn love. There's if they don't love me, then I'm worthless. If I can't get them to love me, then I must not be lovable. There's a lot of punitive internal dialogue going on. There's a lot of scarcity attitudes about love and the possibilities in the world. There's also this concept that there's these ideas about unconditional love. If I just love them unconditionally, then they'll see that no one else could ever love them in the way that I do, and then eventually they'll come back to me. And so confusion around a lack of boundaries and self-abandonment and calling that unconditional love, which it isn't. So there's the beliefs. First, you want to examine your beliefs and how those are actually compelling your behaviors. Now, these beliefs are usually like a layer of goop that's sort of frosted on top of some fears, right? So if these are your beliefs, then what are you afraid of? That I'm not lovable, that I'm not worthy, that I'm going to fail, that I'm not attractive enough, I'm not smart enough, a lot of not enoughness, usually not enoughness. And the paradox is that it's also, the not enoughness tends to vibrate at the same frequency as too much, right? I'm not enough, but I'm too much. I'm not enough for this person to love me because I'm too much and I'm too intense for them and they experience me as a burden. Right? So there's these not enough and too much kind of vibes going on, usually simultaneously at the same time, creates a lot of friction and tension within you, right? So there's the beliefs, then there's the fears of being not enough and too much, right? So these two things together sometimes construct this romanticism, this romanticizing human relationship. And this looks like, they're my soulmate, they're my twin flame, this is meant to be, I got to make it work. If I don't make it work, then my life has somehow gone horribly wrong, and I'll just spend the rest of my life having settled for someone that's not as exciting or doesn't light me up in the same way or doesn't provide the same challenge. And when that happens, romanticism is actually setting you up to experience suffering as a measure for your love. If I'm not suffering for them, then I must not love them. It must not be true love. If they don't suffer for me in the way that I suffer for them, then they must not really love me either. If they don't need me, then why would they love me? If I didn't need them, what is love, right? So it's an expression of a very conditional way of experiencing the world. It's a very conditional way of experiencing love, right? You think you're no longer going to experience pleasure in relational exchanges, but once you're able to show up to those things as a full cup, it's sort of like the metaphor I've used before in the past is that oftentimes these conditional ideas about love and needing, I need to be needed and all of that, it turns love into a scoreboard, an exchange of goods and services. And that by its very nature is conditional. There are degrees of conditions that we have, especially in our romantic relationships. I might even argue that our romantic relationships are, in fact, the most conditional relationships that we have, because they are the people who are the closest in proximity to us. And they usually involve expressing our love through things like time, energy, effort, and resources, right? Material, physical things. But beneath that, we can experience an unconditional love, which I really define as regard, as appreciation. That it's a sense of regard and appreciation and an admiration for someone, independent of what they think of you, how they feel about you, what you can get from them, whether they fulfill your needs or not. That's all conditional stuff, and it does weave into healthy relationships on a certain level, but it's secondary to me, if not tertiary, to the regard. And the regard has to come first, because if you don't have that regard, which is a sense of love and admiration for someone independent of their relationship to you, then you're not going to be motivated to work on when you butt up against the contrasts in life, which will manifest through the time, energy, effort, and resources that you then decide to share with each other, right? That you then show up to the conditional part of the conversation with an open heart, with a sense of regard and appreciation and a willingness to compromise, right? So how do you discern that? Well, first you take a look at, so we talked about limiting beliefs, we talked about the fears that underlie it, then we talk about how the romanticism sort of evolves out of an interaction between those things. Now that romanticism is going to continue to fuel the fears and the limiting beliefs, and it's going to keep you chasing after things that actually protect you from letting anything in that's real. That's real, right? Because usually these romantic ideas and fantasies that we have, our ego creates because it keeps us above it all, because it prevents us from actually engaging in a real nitty-gritty relationship that doesn't feel good all the time, because, but overall there is a sense of understanding that the connection is a worthwhile endeavor, and not toxic. So how do you discern that? So I have a video on my channel, which is, I think it's 7 questions to assess if you're in a toxic relationship or not. Am I in intuition or in, excuse me, is it my intuition or survival mode? I have another one, 7 questions to determine, should I stay or should I go? So I like to think of this as an expression of your chakra system that the body always knows. So I'm not going to go through it again because I have 2 videos that do this, but basically you ask each chakra center, energy center, does this person contribute to my sense of purpose? Do I feel safe speaking my mind with this person? Do I love myself do I like and love myself when I'm with them? Are they loving and accepting of me? Are they generous of spirit? Are they generous with their time, energy, and resources? Do they give me the benefit of the doubt? Do they give me the benefit of the doubt? Yes, do you give it to them, but do they give it to you too? Do you feel safe expressing your emotions with them? Do you have a lighted feeling? Does it feel like coming home? Or are you always constantly on this like adrenaline high? Are you always being like overstimulated around them? Positively or negatively? Do you feel safe in your body? Can you talk about sex openly with them? Can you ask for what you want in terms of physical affection, right? So in secure relationships, the answer is yes to all of these. If you're in a relationship that isn't serving you, typically the answer is no to at least a majority of them, right? And then there's obviously the relationships that are some gray space in between. And then you decide, if the person is motivated enough to work on this with me, then it could evolve into something what I like to call an ascended partnership and relationship. But those are questions you want to ask yourself, right? So I guess I'll review that one more time. You want to look at the beliefs that you're carrying around. You want to notice how those beliefs are really a layer of goop on top of whatever essential fears you may have. You want to take a look at how those fears and those beliefs have cultivated some romantic notions about how love is supposed to go. In particular, on the other side of that, romanticism is usually an expression of believing that suffering is love, that suffering gets confused with love, different variations of suffering. And then lastly, you want to take a look at how the body's going to inform your intuition with this. So 7 questions to ask to help you determine how this person contributes to your life, right? And how they show up to the relationship. And for that piece, I'd invite you to check out those 2 videos on my YouTube channel, Survival Mode or Intuition, 7 questions to know the difference. And then I have another one, 7 questions to determine if you should stay or go. Okay. So those would be probably the 4 main points that I would offer to answer that question. And I hope that it helps. If this helps, please just give me a thumbs up or a like, or let me know in the chat box that helps. My girlfriend left me at the same time my brother was diagnosed with cancer, and they started firing a lot of people at work, plus quarantine, etc. Yeah, that happened to something like that happened to me about 4 years ago. Yeah, when all of those things happen at one time, your attachment security is going to be shaken up, even if you're a secure person. I mean, it's just going to be shaken up. And so I would say the best thing to do is care for yourself. Definitely take time for yourself. What about rekindled romance in a failed marriage, but after intense counseling and self-work in a 3-year period? What about it? What's the question? What is the question? Maybe you're asking me what is the definition of romance. So to my mind, the definition of romance is when first there's the choice, right? So first there's the choice. You're with someone, you've assessed their character, you've decided that there's enough level of regard and admiration for who they are, independent of what they do and or give to you, right? So you take yourself out of the equation and you say, this person I absolutely adore and admire and feel like contributes to the whole of humanity just by being who and what they are. Just by being who and what they are. I really admire that person, right? And I feel like I would give something to that person without any need and or desire for them to give me something back, because I know that contributing to them contributes to the collective. That's where you start. That's where you start. That's where romanticism, real romance, starts. And then once you have that in place, then the second thing is recognizing that and having, well, maybe this is the first thing, recognizing that you feel that way about yourself, that you feel that way about them. And now the 2 of you move into a shared space, right? So then you make that, I guess that's really the third thing, is you make a commitment, you make a choice, you decide, because of the regard that I have for this person, and I commit myself to determining if we could be a compatible match now in terms of all the conditional things that go on in a relationship. So you've got the unconditional regard first. Okay, now let's look at the conditional parts, right? So that means, do we have the same values? Do we prioritize our values in the same way? That's 2 different things. What is it? How do I conceive of long-term relationship? What is the structure of my life? What kind of structure do I want my life to have? Because when we are stuck in survival mode and we're really hopped up on heavy doses of romanticism, we don't usually ask ourselves, what's the day-to-day going to be like? What's the routine life going to be like? We don't write out a month's schedule of what it's going to look like when you actually have them. You're so preoccupied with catching or keeping, you don't think about what is it like to be on an even keel with someone, to go through life's up and downs, right? So that comes down to values and priorities. What are your values? Do you prioritize them equally? And you may have values that you don't value similarly, but if one person prioritizes it very highly and the other person, is willing to compromise on that, then you have to look at how willing you are to compromise on certain things. Then maybe it's not that big a deal. Maybe it's not a deal breaker. But if you have extremely different values, or you want extremely different things, or there's a value that maybe you both, have some agreement on, but you prioritize it very differently, that's where you start to see cracks in the notion of a long-term committed relationship with someone, because there are conditional needs that exist in a long-term relationship with someone, right? So the romantic part comes in when you are willing to sit down and talk about those things. And you're able to really look at, in a very sincere and honest way, I want to show up in a real way. I want to give my resources to you. I want to have fights and then have these painful emotional conversations where parts of our inner child come up and are able to express themselves in a safe way. I want to, laugh when we both fart for the first time in front of each other. I want to hold your hair back when you get food poisoning. I want to be there when your mom's or your brother or your aunt or your sister is diagnosed with cancer and you get home and you're so fucking exhausted that you can't even see straight, let alone attend to your partner's needs. I want to have dinner ready and waiting for you on the table with no expectation of return on that, right? That's romance. That's romance. I mean, that's the kind of love that they write poems about. That's the kind of love that they make movies about, right? Really, I mean, good movies. You know what I mean? So that's romance. The sort of the drama, the endless cycling and analysis and drama and hamster wheel that goes on in our heads about why they do this, why they do that, reading into every little. This is a romanticism. This is a romanticism of suffering that is really an ego defense against not knowing what it's like to feel seen, not knowing what it's like to be acknowledged, not knowing what it's like to really be loved, and believing that you're not lovable and not good enough. So you're stuck in this endless performance review. And the analysis of other people and how they respond to you is you writing an endless performance review of yourself, basically, right? You're always assessing their proximity to you, and that's all that it is. So when you do that, you're not really letting anyone or anything in. So that's why I believe that when we're struggling with these insecure attachment styles, the inner work's got to be going on if any of the outer work is going to be effective, especially in an interpersonal situation. So I hope that kind of clarifies my definition of romanticism. But in essence, it's a choice to be open and receptive and be generous from a place of abundance, be generous from a place of filled up, right? Be generous from a place of unconditional regard, so that now you can share these conditional situations discerningly, which means informed by your understanding of what your shared values and priorities are in life, in love, in relationship, in the structure that you want to build for your life, right? Okay, I hope that helps. Okay, I'm not good with acronyms because people use acronyms to describe different things. So if you're going to ask a question, make sure you spell it out so I know what you mean. You mentioned many times the necessity of emotional honesty and communication. Is this applicable to all types of attachment types? People will see it as a further threat. Okay, so this is an important point to make. I don't think I have my whiteboard with me. So there are degrees. I want to go back to what I started with, which is that attachment styles are gradations of a frequency of attitudes and behaviors. Now, emotional honesty and vulnerability works with someone who is motivated and wants to increase the intimacy and emotional honesty in the relationship. Someone who is equally invested in that endeavor. Okay. You cannot force someone to be equally motivated or interested in that endeavor. You can't. And we talked about this in our last live stream, actually. I'm going to equate emotional honesty with vulnerability, just to define that in this little clip here. The goal of emotional honesty is not to inspire, motivate, affect your partner to act, do, say, behave, or feel a certain way. That's not the goal of emotional honesty. And we have a tendency to think, oh, I established my boundaries. I expressed myself honestly. I'm practicing vulnerability, and it's not working. Working at what? Working at what? Well, my partner's still the way they are. My partner doesn't want to do this with me. My partner doesn't want to behave in the way I want them to behave. They're not feeling the way I want them to feel. If I'm going to open up emotionally, I'm only willing to do that unless if I know if there's a chance that they are going to respond, feel, act, say, do XYZ as a result. So you're still stuck in an external validation oriented paradigm, right? The goal of emotional honesty and vulnerability is self-advocacy. It's self-advocacy. It's a fact-finding mission. It's an invitation. And if your partner doesn't accept that invitation, or they experience your increasing emotional intimacy and expression of a desire for a deepening of the relationship, right? A deepening of the connection between you. If they respond to that with a feeling of threat, there's something within them that is disconnecting them from themselves, right? And if you rely upon them to validate your being emotionally honest with yourself and with them, then you will always be stuck in a spiral, because that's not where that kind of validation comes from. Because then you say, oh, it didn't work, so I'm not going to be emotionally honest or authentic anymore, right? It didn't work. So now the part of you that the authentic self, the inner child, if you will, that was compelling you to express yourself honestly, and you gave a reprieve to that part of yourself, and you're like, oh, fine, I'm going to give you a chance to talk, and the teacher didn't give you an A, so now you're never going to talk again, right? So now that part of you is going to feel angry with you, because you're still thinking that the teacher is the only one that knows everything in the world, right? Your partner is the only one that knows everything in the world, and only your partner can validate if expressing yourself authentically works. So you got to shift your expectation, your notion, your idea about the rewards of emotional honesty and vulnerability. It's not about getting your partner to behave in the way you want them to. It's not about having them open up in the ways you wish they would, because you're trying to be brave and open up yourself. Yes, you're trying to be brave to open up yourself so that you can start to live a life where you're on fire about life and don't have to feel confined by the insecurities of someone else being disconnected from themselves. Your disconnection from yourself is not going to dictate how valid it is for me to live my life, how valid it is for me to have my feelings, my right to be angry, my right to have needs, my right to this, my right to that. It's like being born with fingernails and then asking your partner over and over again, can I keep my fingernails, please? Oh, please, can I keep my fingernails? Please don't take them away. It just is what it is. You don't ask the rock to justify its stillness. You don't ask the wave. You don't tell the wave it needs permission to crash against the shore. You don't need permission, right? If they don't respond to your emotional honesty and authenticity in the way that you wanted, that's really good information for you. Because what you did right there is you opened up the possibility for deepening intimacy, right? And yes, there are skills you can learn for communicating in such a way that an avoidant partner, for example, might be more receptive to what you're saying. And I have 100 videos on that on my playlist on YouTube called Communication. And if you're in my Facebook group, we have a unit in the sidebar menu under units called Compassionate Communication. And I go over, nonviolent communication. We go over how to phrase, how to notice, interpret, name, and claim your own emotions, and then to articulate them with what's called positive action language, specificity, and being open to co-creations with a partner so that they can hear and listen and receive what the real meaning of what you're trying to articulate, right? Because oftentimes we don't express our real needs. We're just expressing all the defensive goop on top of our needs, right? Yes, that does exist. But let's say you've tried all of that and your partner is still too threatened and still perceiving your emotional honesty as a disruption to the dysfunctional system that has been occurring in your relationship. That is really good information. It doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't working. It means they're not ready, and it means you are, right? So now you have expanded beyond the confines of whatever the parameters of that relationship were, and you have choices. And you say, do I still have a desire and a need and a want to expand in relationship to someone? Am I interested in exploring a relational space and all that could contribute to my life and the collective? Or do I feel like I want the real world exchanges, the conditional exchanges of this relationship to remain intact, but I'm going to start doing an inner journey, an inner expansion, a spiritual exploration, if you will, of what my potentials and my capacities are. And I accept that my partner is not willing to go there with me, and that's okay. Because the way it's going to look in real life is I will have some of my conditional needs and exchanges met with them, and my spiritual needs are going to expand in my inner space and or in other various areas of contrast and other communities and friends and whatnot. You may make that decision. A lot of couples do. They give each other permission to go and do what they want. But you may be someone who's like, no, I need and want and have to have my partner being a part of that expansion, in which case then this is a person who's not a compatible fit for you anymore. And that's okay. It actually doesn't even mean that you don't have unconditional regard for them anymore. It just means that wherever you have progressed on your spiritual journey, on your journey of self-acknowledgement and expression and the authenticity with which you want to live your life has just expanded beyond their volume. And this leads us to sometimes your purpose is not the same thing as your potential. So people stay in relationships and they're like, oh, but they've got so much potential. Of course they do. Everything in life has potential. Everything stems from source. All things have potential, all of them. But whether or not it is realized is what helps you discern, is this someone that's going to help me continue expanding into my potential? Or is their purpose on this earth to actually be a sounding board or a point of contrast against which I can butt up against to recognize where I am in my process, and that these are actually the next steps I would have to take to step into my fullest circumference, whatever that looks like, right? Staying or going. There's any number of scenarios that could look like. Only you are going to know the answer to that. So I hope that helps. I hope to have you on my podcast one day. Well, if you're interested, you can send me a pitch on my web. I am actually in the next year. We are putting together a list of podcasts that I would like to guest spot on. So if you're interested, on my website, briannamcwilliam.com, you can just contact me through the contact form with your podcast and your pitch, and we can talk about it. Can replying with the silent treatment as an answer to silent treatment as a way to change the TA game? I'm assuming anxious, avoidant, trap, maybe? Well, the answer is no, because you're responding to, you're adding more to that momentum, right? So you're sort of playing the same game, and that's going to add more momentum to the scenario. So the way to do it is to just be honest with yourself. What am I noticing in this moment? What do I feel compelled to do? Digging it. Actually, I would have you check out my playlist on communication, and there's 2 videos in there. It's like 3 questions to ask yourself before explaining attachment styles to your partner. And then the second one is like, it's part 1 and 2. The second one is like 6 tips on how to approach your partner with attachment styles. There's some examples I offer in those videos that actually touch upon this question, not about the silent treatment specifically, but it talks about communication between partners, and when you feel compelled to respond to them in a certain way, digging into what is behind that compulsion, and then being able to access a healthier way of approaching it for you, right? To the impulse to respond to silent treatment with silent treatment. Is it really the silent treatment also? Because we did the last 2 live streams, we've actually talked about the silent treatment. So you can find those on my YouTube channel as well specifically. But sometimes the silent treatment is misinterpreted. It's actually someone taking space so that they can repair and come back because they're overwhelmed. But sometimes the silent treatment is being used as a manipulative ploy to position oneself in the power dynamic of the relationship. And if that's the case, why are you playing into it? Just go about your business. It's not worth your time, energy, and effort, right? And you can say, look, I feel like you're giving me the silent treatment. And if that's the case, it feels like it's sort of an inauthentic way to approach working out the situation. And if that's the case, I don't have time for that. And it's just telling me a lot about what's possible in this relationship. And I know that it's incongruent with what my values and priorities are in relationship. And while I still have regard for you and admiration for you, I now know that those conditional exchanges will not be met in this scenario. So I'm going to continue to explore my options, right? Does the not enoughness apply to Rolling Stones too? I would say the not enoughness applies to Rolling Stones, maybe even more so than anxiously attached individuals, because you are not avoidant if you're, what are you avoiding? What are you avoiding? That's why I think that these titles, avoidant, anxious, disorganized, are not good, because they don't actually describe what they describe. They're not good at describing what they describe, because if you say a whole group of people behave in an anxious way, you're sort of qualifying that way of being as somehow exclusive and or different from the way these people behave, right? But avoidant people are extremely anxious. A lot of them are extremely anxious. How they have, I would say, individuals that are dismissive avoidant don't have a lot of awareness around it. Individuals that are fearful avoidant have a lot of awareness around it. And then that's has more to do with their behaviors in response to the anxiety, the avoidant part. But, very anxious. Disorganized people are extremely anxious. Avoidant people are extremely anxious. Anxious people are extremely anxious. What you're witnessing are attitudes and behaviors, patterns of attitude and behavior that evolve as coping skills for how to deal with that anxiety. All insecurely attached individuals are anxious. Attachment styles describe a pattern of coping and a pattern of attitude that evolve as a response to their conditions and their temperament. So, and it's all nervous system. If it gets severe as a result of trauma, usually as sympathetic nervous system and dorsal vagal shutdown. So it's the activation of your nervous system and also your limbic brain. If trauma is involved somewhere in here, then that means that your hippocampus and your amygdala were not communicating very well. And so there's an energetic charge that's in your body compelling you in ways that feel like it's beyond your conscious control, because it is. Because the amygdala is like the alarm bell for your body. And so your nervous system lights up, everything in your body lights up, that there's something on an instinctual level, there's something that we need to be attending to on the level of survival here. And our attachment relationships are a facet of this. And so and incidentally, your brain responds to, your amygdala responds to thoughts in your brain that suggest this, not just external things in your environment. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference. So if you just think a thought that feels threatening to your attachment relationship, you're going to light up, right? And your sensitivity to that, again, based on your temperament, which we might also associate with your epigenetics, your inherent disposition, right? So it can respond to your thoughts and to your environment in the same way. So I guess what I want to emphasize here is that the not enoughness is a thought, a frequency of thought, and then there are the behaviors that we adopt to respond to that not enough feeling. And so depending on the intensity of the not enough feeling, you may be more avoidant or you might be more anxious. I would argue individuals that are more avoidant actually have it more intensely, because anxious open hearts are still hopeful. They're fighting for the relationship, because they're still hopeful, right? There's still an openness there initially. The paradox, though, is that sometimes the openness is a disguise for a deeper layer of avoidance within themselves. So that happens when they start chasing unavailable partners. When you chase an unavailable partner and they're unavailable and they've proven to you over and over again that they're unavailable and you still keep doing it, it's because it's safe. Because chasing them is safe. Because you don't really have an expectation that they're going to turn around and suddenly become your Prince Charming, or your the woman of your dreams, or the gender fluid person of your dreams. It's like, that chasing them is safe because you're never going to get caught, because you're not running the risk of them turning around and looking too closely and ultimately articulating your deepest fear, which is that you're not worthy, that you're not lovable, that you are a burden. And so it's better and safer and easier to just be strung along, because you aren't running the risk of that ever being confirmed on some level, right? Okay. I would like to say how much I appreciate your work. The sensitive way you talk about human experience helps me to embrace the negative sides of my avoidance without shame. I'm glad to hear that. I'd like to ask how to work with feeling emotions in the body, even though the first reaction is strong to freeze it out. So this is a good question. I have a couple videos on my channel called Healing Attachment with Limbic Experiences, and it's just what you're asking about. There's also another video on charge in the body. And if you look up my playlist on, I think I called it attachment and spirituality, there are a lot of arts-based guided visualizations and activities that will walk you through some processes that touch upon this very thing, like how to access feelings and emotions in the body creatively. One thing I will say is that meditation is a broad thing. There's lots of different forms of meditation. If someone has experienced avoidance to the part where you feel like you're freezing out your emotions, then there may be a level of threat in your system that is going to experience meditation as threatening, because meditation is essentially a stillness in which you go in and you remain open and receptive. Now, for someone who's experienced trauma, that's very scary. That's very threatening and very scary. So instead, your mind will start creating a laundry list of things in your head so that you're not able to establish a quiet in your mind. So I actually recommend guided visualization for individuals with attachment wounding first, because it helps you organize the inner space. Now, if there's an even more severe layer of trauma and threat that guided visualization even feels threatening, then I actually recommend that you start with the external world before moving in. So you start creating what are called anchors. So, and anything could be an anchor. It could be a vision board where you find collaged images of stuff and you put them together and you kind of focus on the image. And you start to create a construct for it in the physical world of form before bringing it into the body as an organizing construct for your internal world. So I'll give you a better example. Safe place. That's usually the best place to start. Safe place. What is a safe place? We need to establish a safe and neutral place. Well, I don't feel like there's a safe and neutral place inside my body, because anytime I close my eyes, I feel like, I'm stuck, I'm frozen, I'm dissociated, I'm numb out, I fall asleep, right? Okay, so we start by talking about safety. What does safety mean to you? We write a few words that associate with safety. Is there ever a place that you felt safe, physical place that you felt safe? Is there a landscape that you might associate with safety? Are there colors? Are there lines? Are there shapes that you might associate with safety? If there were, just talking about it, if there were the safest or most neutral place in your body, where might it be right now? If we were to imagine your body as a landscape, where might that reside? And we don't go in yet, because what we're doing is we are assessing your window of tolerance. Actually, that's the other one you should watch too. Trigger mapping and widening your window of tolerance is all about this. But looking at what are your triggers, at what point do you start to dissociate? At what point do you start to freeze it out, right? How much sensation can you notice before you fall asleep? Before you start to feel kind of dopey? Like, I've had clients who, when we try to do this work, start to feel kind of drunk as a way to escape the visualization. So you start on a very tangible level. And so maybe we've had this conversation, we've talked about this. So now I ask you to make a collage of a safe space, what that might look like. Then I ask you to draw it with your own hand, right? Then I ask you to take the image that you had. Maybe you make it into, maybe I give you some clay and you model it, and maybe it's a home, maybe it's a tree, maybe it's a landscape, and you model it in 3 dimensions, right? And then I ask you to really focus upon that. And now just close your eyes and try to recreate that in your mind's eye, right? So it's a slower approach. And we start by where you're at, which is a preoccupation with the external world. Okay, let's start with the external world. Let's build that construct in a physical, tangible reality where you can touch it and hold it and have an engagement with it. And now we are widening that window, right? And then we say, okay, let's try and bring it in. And how well can you picture that in your mind's eye? Well, I can see the trunk. Can you imagine your hand reaching out and touching the trunk? Yes. Can you imagine what bark feels like? Yes, I can. Okay, so we're widening it, right? So it's little processes like this that are going to start to construct. It sounds like unrelated. Well, how is that going to help me in my romantic relationship? But it's not unrelated. This is how you get to a place of felt security in your relationship. You start with symbol formation. You start with giving your body the tools to organize its affect states through metaphor, through creativity, through experience, through navigating that bridge between inner and outer experience, right? Building a bridge between inner and outer experience through creativity, which is how I do it. And then over time, now that you have these like images and these symbols and these metaphors that when you go in are constructing and organizing the inner space stops feeling so scary. And then you start relaxing. And then when you relax, now you can invite the full essence of your soul, your energy, your spirit to really sink down and inhabit your sacred temple. And when you inhabit your body, it's such a grounding experience, and it's such a fully present experience, and people around you respond to that. They want to be near you. It's intoxicating because so many of us are not, right? So I hope that helps. What are your thoughts on the link between somatostorm disorders and unresolved trauma? Well, I definitely think that there is a connection there that kind of gets into broader spiritual beliefs. I think I'm going to let that one sit for a minute. I'm glad that you like that explanation. I'm not sure if it's my fear and anxiety, but I'm afraid that my relationship with my boyfriend becomes lukewarm and neither of us is forward enough to be passionate and stay stuck in stasis. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're making an accurate diagnosis. It's like when we slip into a pattern of expecting that it's someone else who has to spark the feelings within us, then it's easy to fall into a state of stuckness, right? Or boredom, because we think it's the other person's job to entertain us or to light us up in that way. But this is kind of goes back to my definition for romance. It's actually our job to light ourselves up in that way. And then it's our partner's job to light themselves up in that way. And then when you're both lit up, now you're really exciting to each other, right? So that's sort of the paradox, is that you have to be in it's I like to think of it as like a figure 8. So you got these two circles, right? You and the other person. And then the infinity symbol is the symbol that moves energy in and around you both, right? It ties you into each other, which means that you both have to be spinning your wheels equally. Like you both have to be moving that energy and momentum equally in order for that infinity symbol to keep going, in order for that momentum to be maintained. If you're just sitting here hanging out, waiting for the other person to stimulate you or to enliven you or to impassion you, you're sort of like, you're throwing a wrench in the wheel. And so then they're not going to get, the energy sort of kind of fizzles, right? And the momentum loses its momentum. It loses its steam, its acceleration. So that's why it's like we have to figure out what keeps us alive, what keeps us on fire about life. And then we invite our partner to move alongside of us in parallel ways. If we keep trying to suck each other's oxygen, right, the energy is always just going to be a ball tossed back and forth between you. You can't move. It's linear. You can't move in that way. But if you both have things that light you up on fire and that you realize it's your job to be lit up, then now you can move in all directions, right? You both have your own oxygen tank. You can deep dive, right? You can keep that momentum going. And of course, maybe, we all arrive at that place where you're like, well, I'm willing to do that, but my partner's not willing to do that. And that brings us back to the first or second question we talked about, which is yes. So now you have expanded far enough that you're asking questions about, is my expansion served by the relationship that I'm in? Do I need a relationship to serve my expansion? Can I maintain the physical constructs of this relationship for what it is and appreciate it for what it is, and then expand in my own internal space and circumference, right? Those are questions that you would ask yourself. All right, so with that, I'm going to end. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here today. And again, this live stream is in promotion of my course, 5 Days to Ignite Your Love Light, which is on sale for 50% off right now. Digs into limiting beliefs and mindset reset and all of that good stuff. So feel free to check it out. I will include a link to that in the caption of this video. And I hope that you all have a wonderful New Year's celebration.